The first time I saw Daniel Carter, he was leaning over a canvas, his brush moving like it was an extension of his soul, and I hated him instantly. His blonde hair caught the light in the art studio, making him look like some golden boy who'd never known failure. While I stood there, my own sketch half finished, my hands trembling with doubt. By the end of that semester, he'd become the shadow I couldn't escape, the name whispered in every critique, and I swore I'd never let him win, not in art, not in anything. My name is Ethan Hayes, and I was 22, a senior at Willow Creek College, a small liberal arts school in upstate New York. Art was my refuge, my way of making sense of a world that often felt too sharp, too unforgiving. Growing up in a small, conservative town nearby, I'd learned early to keep parts of myself hidden. Me sketches were where I poured the truths I couldn't say aloud. Like the way my heart raced when I saw a guy like Daniel, even if I buried that feeling under resentment. The art department was my sanctuary, but Daniel's arrival in my final year turned it into a battlefield. He was everything I wasn't: confident, polished, effortlessly charming. Professors fawned over his bold use of color, his ability to make every stroke feel alive. I'd spent years honing my craft, scraping by on scholarships and late-night practice, while Daniel seemed to waltz in with natural talent and a smile that disarmed everyone. Our first real clash came during a group critique in October, when Professor Linden held up Daniel's painting, a vivid, chaotic depiction of a city skyline at dusk, and called it revolutionary. My own work, a muted charcoal sketch of a crumbling barn, was dismissed as safe. I felt my face burn as Daniel caught my eye, not gloating, but worse-pitying. "Nice work, Ethan," he said later, his voice smooth, like he meant it. I wanted to punch him. Instead, I muttered, "Whatever," and stormed out, my sketchbook clutched like a shield. That moment cemented it. Daniel was my rival, the golden boy I had to outshine. But even then, I couldn't ignore the way his hands moved when he painted, precise yet free, like they held secrets I'd never unravel. The art department was small, so avoiding him was impossible. We shared studio hours, critique sessions, and the same relentless pressure to stand out for the senior showcase, where one student would win a solo exhibition at a local gallery. I needed that win. It wasn't just pride. It was a chance to prove I belonged, to silence the voices from my hometown that said I'd never make it as an artist, let alone as someone who didn't fit their narrow mold of normal. Daniel, with his easy confidence, seemed to have nothing to prove, which only fueled my resentment. By November, our rivalry was the talk of the department. Classmates placed bets on whose work would impress Professor Linden most. I threw myself into my art, staying late in the studio, my hands smudged with charcoal and paint. One night, I found Daniel there too, working on a massive canvas, his shirt sleeves rolled up, paint flecking his forearms. The room was quiet except for the soft scratch of his brush. I hated how calm he looked, how his hands never faltered. "You're here late," he said, not looking up. "Had to be," I snapped, setting up my easel as far from him as possible. "Some of us don't get by on charm." He laughed, a low, warm sound that made my stomach twist. "You think I'm charming?" I ignored him, but my focus was shot. His presence filled the room, like the air itself was charged. I told myself it was anger, nothing more. But when he stepped closer to critique my sketch, a jagged, abstract figure in reds and blacks, I braced for a jab. Instead, he said, "This is raw, Ethan. It's honest. Don't hide that." His green eyes met mine, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. I mumbled something and turned away, my heart pounding. I didn't need his approval. I didn't want it. That night, I lay awake, replaying his words, his voice, the way his hands had gestured toward my canvas. I hated him, didn't I? So why did I keep noticing the curve of his fingers? The way they seemed to know exactly what to do. I buried the thought, focusing on the showcase. I'd beat him, prove I was better, and leave this obsession behind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about art anymore. Winter settled over Willow Creek, blanketing the campus in snow and sharpening the tension between Daniel and me. The senior showcase loomed closer, and every brushstroke felt like a step toward either triumph or failure. I was determined to outdo him, but his presence in the studio was a constant distraction, his hands moving with a grace that made my own feel clumsy. One freezing December evening, the art department hosted a holiday exhibition, a chance for students to display their work to the public. I'd poured weeks into a new Paisea large-scale oil painting of a stormy lake, all churning blues and grays, inspired by the turmoil I felt inside. It was bold, risky, and deeply personal, a reflection of the emotions I'd never dared voice. I hung it in the gallery, my nerves raw, only to see Daniel's piece across the room, a vibrant mural of interconnected hands, painted in warm golds and reds, radiating hope and unity. The crowd gravitated toward it, their murmurs of awe like a knife in my chest. "Ethan, your lake is haunting," a classmate said, but her eyes drifted to Daniel's mural. I forced a smile, my hands shoved in my pockets to hide their trembling. When Daniel approached, holding 2 cups of hot cider, I braced for another smug comment. Instead, he handed me a cup and said, "Your painting, it's like you ripped open a wound. That takes guts." His sincerity caught me off guard, and I hated how it made my anger falter. "Thanks," I muttered, sipping the cider to avoid his gaze. His hands, still flecked with paint, wrapped around his own cup, and I couldn't stop staring. They were strong yet delicate, the kind of hands that could build or break something fragile. I shook off the thought, reminding myself he was the enemy. But as the night wore on, we ended up in a corner, talking not about art, but about music, movies, the way snow made the campus feel like another world. For the first time, I saw him as more than a rival, and it terrified me. The next week, Professor Linden paired us for a collaborative project, a cruel twist of fate. We were to create a joint piece for the showcase, blending our styles. I wanted to refuse, but the stakes were too high. We met in the studio, the air thick with tension. "Let's do something real," Daniel said, his green eyes intense. "Something that says who we are." I scoffed, assuming he'd push for something flashy, but he suggested a theme of identity masks. Facades, the things we hide. It hit too close to home. We worked late, sketching ideas, arguing over every detail. Daniel's hands moved with purpose, sketching fluid lines that somehow complemented my jagged ones. One night, as we debated colors, our hands brushed while reaching for the same paint tube. The contact sent a jolt through me, and I pulled back, my face hot. "Sorry," he said, but his voice was soft, like he'd felt it too. I mumbled an excuse and left, my heart racing. I couldn't let this happen, not with him, not with anyone. Back in my dorm, I stared at my sketches, trying to focus on the project, but all I could see were his hands, the way they'd moved so close to mine. I'd spent years hiding who I was, convincing myself I could keep my feelings locked away. But Daniel was unraveling me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I told myself it was just the stress, the competition, but deep down, I knew it was more. I hated him for making me feel this way, for making me want something I'd sworn to bury. January brought a bitter cold to Willow Creek, mirroring the chill in my chest as I wrestled with my feelings for Daniel. Our collaborative project forced us together, And every session was a battle not just over art, but over the emotions I refused to name. His hands, always so steady, became my obsession, a symbol of everything I both admired and resented. We settled on a concept, a diptych, two canvases showing the contrast between outer masks and inner truths. My half was dark, angular, full of sharp lines and muted tones, reflecting the walls I'd built around myself. Daniel's was vibrant, fluid, with colors that seemed to pulse with life. Working together was torture. Every suggestion he made felt like a challenge, every glance a test. Yet, when our ideas clicked, the result was electric, like we were creating something bigger than either of us. One night, snow piled high outside. We stayed late in the studio, music playing softly from Daniel's phone. He hummed along, his hands blending colors with an ease I envied. "Why do you push so hard, Ethan?" he asked suddenly, not looking up. "You're good. You don't need to prove anything." I froze, my brush hovering over the canvas. "You wouldn't get it," I said, my voice sharp. "Not everyone has it easy like you." He set down his brush, his eyes meeting mine. "You think I have it easy?" His voice was low, raw. "I've been fighting to be seen my whole life, Ethan. Just differently." For the first time, I saw a crack in his confidence, a glimpse of something vulnerable. I wanted to ask more, but fear held me back. Instead, I changed the subject, focusing on the canvas. But his words lingered. The next day, during a critique, Professor Linden praised our diptych, calling it a conversation in paint. Daniel grinned, but I felt exposed, like my half of the canvas revealed too much. After class, he caught up with me outside, his breath visible in the cold air. "We're good together, you know," he said, his tone light, but his eyes serious. I shrugged, avoiding his gaze, but my heart pounded. His hands, stuffed in his jacket pockets, seemed to call to me, and I hated myself for noticing. That night, alone in my dorm, I sketched his hands from memory-long fingers, subtle veins, the way they held a brush. The act felt like a confession, one I tore up and buried in the trash. I couldn't let this happen. I'd grown up hearing that feelings like these were wrong, that they'd ruin me. But Daniel was making it impossible to keep them locked away. I threw myself into the project, hoping work would drown out the chaos inside me. But every stroke felt like a step toward a truth I wasn't ready to face. By February, the studio had become our battleground and our refuge. The diptych was nearly complete, but the tension between Daniel and me had shifted, charged with something neither of us named. His hands, once just a source of envy, now haunted me, their movements a language I couldn't stop trying to read. One evening, as we worked side by side, a storm knocked out the power, leaving us in the dim glow of emergency lights. The silence was heavy, broken only by the howl of wind outside. "Guess we're stuck," Daniel said, his voice softer than usual. He lit a candle from the supply closet, its flicker casting shadows across his face. I watched his hands as he set it down, the flame reflecting in his green eyes. "Tell me something real," he said suddenly, sitting cross-legged on the floor. "Why do you hate me?" I swallowed, my throat tight. "I don't hate you," I lied, but my voice betrayed me. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. The truth clawed its way out. "You make everything look easy. I've had to fight for every inch. And you just shine." My hands clenched, and I looked away, ashamed of the admission. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm not what you think, Ethan. I've got my own battles." He hesitated, then added, "I came out to my family last year. They didn't take it well." The words hit me like a punch. I'd assumed he was untouchable, but here he was, bearing a wound I hadn't seen. I didn't know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged, but his hands fidgeted, betraying his calm. I wanted to say more, to tell him I understood, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, we sat in the candlelight, talking about everything and nothing, our fears, our dreams, the art that kept us sane. When the power came back on, the moment broke, but something had shifted between us. The next day, I caught myself watching him again, his hands blending colors with a tenderness that made my chest ache. I was falling, and it terrified me. I'd spent years building walls, convincing myself I could live without this kind of connection. But Daniel was tearing them down, and I didn't know how to stop Heimer if I wanted to. March brought a thaw to Willow Creek, but inside me, a storm was brewing. The diptych was finished, a stunning blend of our styles, and the showcase was weeks away. Yet, all I could think about was Daniel's hands, his voice, the way he'd opened up in the candlelight. I was caught between wanting to run and wanting to stay, to see where this could go. During a late-night session, we hung the diptych in the gallery for a test run. Standing back, I saw how our halves fit together, like two sides of a single truth. We did this, Daniel said, his voice warm with pride. He turned to me, his green eyes searching mine. Ethan, don't. I cut him off, my heart racing. I couldn't handle whatever he was about to say. I turned to leave, but his hand caught my wrist, gentle but firm. Stop running, he said, his voice low. You feel it too, don't you? I yanked my hand away, my face burning. You don't know what I feel, I snapped, but the lie tasted bitter. His touch lingered, and I hated how much I wanted it. I stormed out, the cold air stinging my face as I walked across campus. Back in my dorm, I stared at the ceiling, replaying his words, his touch. I'd spent so long hiding, afraid of what it meant to want someone like him. But denying it was tearing me apart. The next day, I avoided the studio, but Daniel found me in the library, his expression serious. We need to talk, he said, sitting across from me. I'm not your enemy, Ethan. I never was. His hands rested on the table, and I couldn't look away. I wanted to tell him everything, how I'd grown up in a place that made me feel wrong, how his presence was both a torment and a lifeline. But fear choked me, and I just nodded, saying nothing. That night, I started a new sketch, one I didn't show anyone. It was his hands, holding a brush, surrounded by colors that felt like my own heart raw, messy, alive. It was my confession, my surrender, and I locked it away, not ready to face what it meant. But Daniel was in my blood now, and no amount of denial could change that. April arrived, and the showcase was days away. The art department buzzed with nervous energy, but I was unraveling. Daniel's presence was a constant pull, his hands a reminder of everything I was fighting myself. My past, my fear of what it meant to want him. We were in the studio, making final touches to the diptych. When it happened, I dropped a brush, and we both reached for it, our hands colliding. This time, neither of us pulled away. His fingers curled around mine, warm and steady, and I froze, my heart hammering. Ethan, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm tired of pretending. Before I could think, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine. The kiss was soft, tentative, but it set fire to every wall I'd built. I kissed him back, desperate, like I'd been starving for this. His hands cupped my face, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide. When we pulled apart, his eyes were bright, a mix of fear and hope. I've wanted that for months, he admitted. I couldn't speak, my mind reeling. I'd spent so long hating him, only to realize it wasn't hate at all. But the weight of my past crashed in memories of my family's disapproval, the sermons I'd heard growing up, the fear of being seen. I can't, I said, stepping back, my voice breaking. Not like this. Daniel's face fell, but he nodded. I'll wait, he said simply, his hands falling to his sides. I left the studio, my chest tight, torn between what I wanted and what I'd been taught to fear. That night, I didn't sleep, haunted by his touch, his hands, the truth I couldn't escape. The showcase was tomorrow, and I was a wreck. The diptych was complete, a masterpiece of our combined souls. But all I could think about was Daniel's kiss, his hands, the way he'd looked at me. I'd pushed him away, but it hadn't stopped the ache in my chest, the need to be near him. I found him in the gallery, adjusting the lighting on our piece. Ethan, he said, surprised, his hands pausing mid-motion. I took a breath, my voice shaking. I'm scared, I admitted. I've spent my life hiding who I am. But you make me want to stop. His eyes softened, and he stepped closer, his hands reaching for mine. You don't have to hide with me, he said. I see you. Those words broke something in me, and I let him pull me close, his arms a safe harbor I'd never known. We stood there, holding each other, and for the first time, I felt whole. The next day, the showcase was a blur of faces and praise. Our diptych won the solo exhibition, but the real victory was standing beside Daniel, our hands brushing as we accepted the award. I was still afraid, but I was done running. His hands, once my rivals, were now my anchor, guiding me toward a truth I was finally ready to embrace. The solo exhibition was a month later, and our diptych hung in the local gallery, drawing crowds from across Willow Creek. Standing there, watching people study our work, I felt a pride I'd never known. Daniel stood beside me, his hand grazing mine, a quiet promise in his touch. We'd spent the past weeks navigating this new thing between ostentative, messy, but real. One evening, after the gallery closed, we stayed behind, sitting on the floor beneath our painting. I hated you once, I said, my voice soft. He laughed, his green eyes bright. I know, but I always saw you, Ethan. His hand found mine, and I didn't pull away. For the first time, I let myself believe I deserved his touch, his love, the chance to be whole. Our art had brought us together, but it was our courage that kept us there. I'd spent years fighting who I was, but Daniel's hands, those steady, beautiful hands, had shown me I didn't have to. As we left the gallery, hand in hand, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But with him, I was ready to face it, to paint a life where I could be myself, unapologetically.